and welcome to another great episode of Dingers and Stingers, the podcast that knows that no matter how badly I screw up this intro, I could never have a worse intro than Liam Cohen.
Duval.
I'm Dallas Dickinson, and as always, I'm joined by my friends and co-hosts, Drew Knight and Matt Waters. This is our show. This is a sports show, if you must know. And this is a show where we talk about NFL, we talk about MLB, those two mainly. We're going to talk about other sports if something big comes up that we know about, but we want to stay in our wheelhouse. And today's show is going to be good. We are going to be mostly spending time in the NFL today. We're going to talk about the conference championship round. We're going to recap that, talk about those games and what interested us about those games and what we saw that we liked and what we didn't like. We'll then talk about coaching hires. Almost every team in the NFL that needed a coach has got one now. So we'll talk about what happened there. And then we'll go into a little bit of mock draft talk. And then from there, we'll end the show with some MLB quick hits, just going over a couple things that we found interesting over the course of the week. But before we get to business, vibe check. How we doing?
Dude, we're doing great. Honestly, just another lovely week of talking sports with the boys.
I'm doing good in my personal life. In this podcast universe, I'm not thrilled about the Super Bowl matchup that we're getting. We'll get into that in a bit, but it was not the results I necessarily wanted from the weekend. But it is what it is.
Dude, I like the idea of us having our own cinematic universe. Just the Dingers and Stingers cinematic universe.
Nothing from our lives that isn't discussed here exists. You know what I mean? Like we only bring the things in our lives in that we want to. This is where we exist on our own.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And we'll leave it up to our thousands and thousands of listeners to imagine what our personal lives might be like.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just asking to get bullied.
And mine is awesome, just FYI. Yeah. So great. So yeah, let's get into it. We have a lot to discuss. It was a busy weekend, the conference championships. We'll start. Look, the winners were the Chiefs over the Bills and the Eagles over the Commanders. So our Super Bowl matchup is the Kansas City Chiefs versus the Philadelphia Eagles, rematch from a couple years ago. Gut reactions. How do we feel about this matchup?
Yucky, icky. I don't like it. It's kind of just the two teams that do the most to be annoying. Had it work. That's honestly just my gut initial reaction to it. I don't know if Drew. I mean, obviously Drew had some.
Yeah,
has some choice words as well.
It's interesting, and we can get into this, and just so our listeners know, next week is going to be our big Super Bowl breakdown show. So this is mostly about what happened in this past weekend, but obviously we did get the matchup for the Super Bowl. I think, Matt, you're in the camp of I think we're in the same camp where these teams are not who we wanted to be in the Super Bowl. Neither one is particularly likable. However, I think I find myself far and away rooting for the Eagles in this matchup, and I think you are on the other side of that, which will be interesting next week. I think we also, just to call back last episode, we split our predictions. Me and Dallas were correct that the Eagles ended up beating the Commanders, and Matt, you were right that the Chiefs pulled it out against the Bills. Yeah, I mean, I think just kind of, it should be a good game. It's probably the two best teams this year. I mean, I said the Lions were the best team a couple weeks ago. Obviously, that wasn't the case. But from just from the standpoint of the matchup, it's kind of boring. We've seen it. We saw it very recently. The teams are not that different from a couple years ago. And part of that is kind of cool because it's historic, and maybe someday we'll look back on it with some fondness. But right now it's I would have rather seen some new teams get in there.
Yeah, dude. I mean, I think, like you said, we're both kind of hate watching this game, right? Like neither of us are stoked, but for you, it's the Chiefs are a division rival. You've
Uh,
seen the Chiefs win your division 1 trillion times in your lifetime at this point. It
yeah.
it just kind of gets to be old. The only reason I find myself kind of leaning Chiefs is like you said, it's talking historical stuff, right? We've never seen a three-peat. That's kind of cool. Like that is at the end of the day kind of cool. I don't want to miss the chance to like watch something legendary. But two, it's funny that the recording of this falls today because today is the 30-year anniversary of the 49ers last Super Bowl. It's been 30 years to the day since the 49ers have won a Super Bowl. And the Chiefs are in great part a reason why they have it. They have beaten them twice, and I gotta give my respect to the Chiefs for helping that be the case, right? Like if I have to give them a three-peat in exchange for beating the 49ers, absolutely I would do it again. So at the end of the day, it is all personal bias in this one. There is no objective fanship going into this game.
Oh no, no. But
Yeah,
you
well,
nailed
we'll
it. I
talk.
mean,
Yeah,
sorry. Yeah, like I mean, I'm just Patrick Mahomes again. Like someday I'll look back and be like, wow, he's the greatest quarterback I ever saw, possibly. I mean, this is his fifth Super Bowl appearance in 7 years as a starting quarterback. It is his, if he wins, it'll be his fourth win, which already ties him for the second most of any quarterback. Um, so it's there's no doubt it's greatness happening before our eyes. I am just sick of it. I thought I was lucky to have Peyton Manning for 4 years at the end of his career. We won the division all 4 of those years. Made the playoffs, obviously. And I was like, this is great. It's nice to be on top. Uh, Seeing the other side of it and much worse because they drafted him and they're going to keep him forever. I'm not loving it. I'm not loving this feeling. And there's no doubt they've been more successful than my Broncos were during the Peyton Manning era. So I don't love it, but I can see the other side because I remember being a kid rooting hard for the Patriots against the Giants so they could have an undefeated season because I thought that would be really cool to see. Obviously, it didn't happen, and obviously, most people on Earth were pretty happy about that. But yeah, it's the matchup we have.
Yeah,
and you
it
know
just
what? It is the matchup we have, and we'll talk much more about that matchup next week. It's going to be great to get into that because there are so many intriguing aspects of that game that are going to be so, interesting to watch, even though we don't like the colors. But that's all right. Yeah, let's talk about these games that happen this weekend, though. We'll start with the NFC Championship. Eagles versus Commanders. The Eagles won by a score of 55-23. Sort of the beatdown that everyone was expecting the Commanders to take the week before. They just delayed it a week by getting the upset against the Lions. So where I want to start with this one is just call back to something that we mentioned on last week's show that actually ended up playing out very well in this game and in fact deciding it, which was our mention of the Commanders' run defense being 30th in the league during the regular season. And that the fact they were going to be going up against the best running back in the league and one of the better offensive lines in the league in Saquon and the Eagles. So in your guys' eyes, what was working so well about Saquon and what was not working so well about the Commanders' defense that sort of made this the matchup that decided the game?
I mean, dude, just from like the first watch of the game, Saquon wasn't being touched until he was 6, 7 yards down the field. It seemed like on every other run play. I mean, they'll run him inside. He'll pick up 4 or 5 yards. Good play. And then it's a pitch outside. And I mean, we saw the very first play of the game for the Eagles, right? Like the very first play from scrimmage on the Eagles was it 68-yard runner? It was something like that. And he broke like 6 tackles and against guys who like I legitimately have respect for. I mean, we're talking about Jeremy Chin, one of the better safeties at especially like in the box and tackling in the open field. And I mean, he just made them look like kids, dude. Like I saw his someone posted his highlights from back when he was playing Pop Warner, nothing looks different, right? Like the fields look different, the stadium looks different, the environment looks different. What he's doing to people on the field looks the same. Like the way he's able to just kind of play and bounce around, like it almost looks like he doesn't even have to take it serious. He's able to just go out there and kind of wheel and deal and figure out where his next 70 yards is coming from. And I think when you look at what the Commanders were struggling with, it was just they could not get any actual meaningful penetration on that offensive line to the point where they had to redirect Saquon, right? Saquon is bound to have his big runs, but if you can't get him to redirect and have to at least like hold up for a few plays, because say what you want about the Rams run defense, I know we got cooked too. Take out the two 70-yard runs, Saquon's day was arguably pretty pedestrian. And that's just not the case when you look at the game this week against the Commanders. I mean, it was play after play, 5, 6, 7, 8 yards, boom, 50-yarder. 5, 6, 7, 8 yards, boom, 60-yarder. And yeah, I mean, I thought that the Commanders had a tough defense, but I thought they'd put up more of a fight than that. I was a little disappointed in the Commanders, to be honest. I mean, Bobby Wagner was, I believe, second team All Pro this year. And like I said, Jeremy Chin, solid. They have Jonathan Allen. So, like, they've got good defensive pieces, especially when it comes to what would be stopping the run game. And just none of it materialized this week.
Yeah, I mean, it's like Dallas said, we kind of called that would be the formula for the Eagles winning this game, and it, from the jump, it looked that way. I will say, credit to Jaden Daniels. It felt like a close game for like 2.5 quarters. You know, um, there was in the first half. I mean, in both halves, I guess, but especially in the first half, the reason the Eagles were up was there just a couple brutal turnovers, some fumbles that just went went against the Commanders, and Eagles capitalized on that by getting touchdowns on both those drives. And I think by the end of the game, it just they just wore them out. The offensive line was doing what they wanted. I mean, there was 7 rushing touchdowns for the Eagles in this game, and that's just. I know there was some silliness going on with like the tush push and all that, but um,
We'll
it
get there.
it
We'll get there.
it just like it just looked like a team playing its strengths against another team's weaknesses. And credit Jaden Daniels. He looked good. He looked poised. But it just wasn't going to be enough in this game. And the score doesn't necessarily reflect how the game felt until like the last quarter. But yeah, it got silly pretty quick.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sure did. And you talk about Jaden Daniels. One of the things that brought him and this Commanders team this far is their ability to create explosive plays, right? You see Jaden Daniels slinging it all over the yard when you look at this whole season and the postseason up to this point. But the Eagles defense, they were really able to put an umbrella on it. They're really able to put the cap on those explosive plays. We talked about their secondary last week, Cooper DeJean, and everyone that comes along with that secondary. I mean, they did a fantastic job at limiting those explosive plays. What did you guys see there that kept, Scary Terry, that kept Jaden Daniels from taking the top off that defense, putting them in some trouble?
I mean, I think just on again, like when it comes to what they did to kind of bottle all that up is one, you got to give credit to the defensive line. I mean, Jaden Daniels constantly was running for his life back there, and as great of a player as he can be outside of the pocket, everyone knows, right? Like you have a great defensive line and you get pressure on a quarterback, the DBs don't have to cover as long. And you got to have that mental clock. Everyone that, works on offensive side of football talks about quarterbacks have to have kind of that mental clock in their head. And it just felt like Jaden Daniels continued to think, he needed to make the big play. And that led to a lot of sacks. That led to a lot of plays that were negatives instead of net neutrals. which I think also put them behind the chains quite a bit. The bigger thing, in my opinion, however, and I'd say this is ultimately the reason that this game looked the way it did, it's the turnovers. I mean, aside from the explosives, the thing that made the Commanders so exciting was they were explosive and they never turned the ball over. Like truly, they took care of the ball, and we talked about it in I believe our first week, but like Jane Daniels is the only quarterback ever, and he did it 3 times to have 0 punts and 0 turnovers on an entire game. And he did it in 3 separate games, right? Scoring on every single drive he had. And I think when you look at it, we got the Austin Eckler fumble, we have the Diami Brown fumble, like we've got, I believe it was 3 separate fumbles, and then finally at the end of the game, Jaden finally throws a desperation interception, and honestly, it was on a spectacular play by the Eagles, Quinion Mitchell, but just the turnovers killed him. I saw this thing where I think it was on Twitter where it was like Jaden Daniels had led the Commanders down to score and bring it within like 3 points. The next play or something, fumble, and the next time he sees the field, they're down 2 possessions. And that happened to him on 2 separate occasions where he would come in, lead the team close, and get that game within, a possession or so. And then a fumble would kill them and they'd lose all their momentum. And at some point against the great teams, you can't be the team making mistakes. Like the reason you win against great teams is making less mistakes. And I think, maybe whether the moment got to them or whatever it was, just 4 turnovers for the Commanders this year is very uncharacteristic. But I think that also goes to show how good the Eagles are as a defense, right? And yeah, you just look at their whole run this postseason and even just how they played this year. They haven't really been this like crazy dominant team, but what they do is they minimize their own mistakes and their defense makes takeaways. And it happened to the Rams. It happened to many teams, and I think the Commanders are just, another cog in the machine for the Eagles this year as that defense just keeps burning through people. So, yeah, I don't know. I feel bad for Jaden Daniels, if I'm being honest. I feel like he played such a good season and such a good game, and I'm bummed it ended that way for him because, like you're saying, Drew, I don't think the game reflects how he played.
Yeah.
Um, and unfortunately, there's a lot of box score vultures out there who are going to be like, he didn't do very well and he had this and blah, and it sucks that that's the way a amazing rookie season has to end.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm not gonna lose too much sleep over that because at the end of the day, he's a rookie and the future looks bright. And yeah, you never know what's gonna happen. We saw Robert Griffin III with this same organization, and then injuries derailed his entire career. But I think there's a lot of promise, and I think, well, I'm not a big X's and O's guy. Like I'm not a football fan in that way. I just, I never have been really. But what I saw from my untrained eye was a team that showed up, that was completely prepared, had a game plan, executed their game plan, and you know, felt like we deserve to be here. We deserve to be the home field team. We deserve to go to the Super Bowl, and they took charge and they took care of business. And the Commanders, credit to them for this run and the season they've had. And like I said, it's a bright future, but it felt like they were a little in over their heads. Like, whoa, we got this far.
Yeah.
And I don't think Jaden Daniels seemed that way, but I think the team as a whole, it was kind of a little bit of a shell shock. But I want to echo what you said. Credit the Eagles. They just executed their game plan. I mean, Jaden Daniels threw 20 more pass attempts than Jalen Hurts did, and he only got 9 more passing yards. So that Eagles secondary and, like you said, the defensive line affects all that. They just came in and they locked it down, especially in the second half.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you talk about, we talked about it a little bit earlier. We want to get into it now, but all those rushing touchdowns for the Eagles, some of those did come from the move they like to do in those short yardage situations, in those goal line situations, that tush push, the brotherly shove, whatever you want to call it. I prefer tush push. It's funnier, but I realize they can't really corporatize that name very well. But so there was that crazy goal line sequence back when this game was a little bit closer than it ended up being, where I believe there were 3 offsides penalties on the Commanders. I found out that if the refs get too pissed off, they can give someone a score. I found that out. I did not know that. Listen, my only contribution to the question that I'm going to ask is that anything that involves me learning a new rule about football after 15 years of watching football should not be allowed. If I have to learn a new rule because you're doing this, you shouldn't be able to do it. But the group chats were lighting up. I'm sure not just ours. I'm sure all over the football world, people talking about what are we going to do about this move, this brotherly shove. Where do you guys stand on this? What do you think? Should more teams do it? That way everyone can do it? Or is this really something only the Eagles can do, and should we do something about that?
I mean, Drew, I don't know if you have anything you want to say. I have something I could say.
I can start.
Please do.
I think I think there's I have 2 things that are true at the same time about this. The first, and this can go for this can be extrapolated for a lot of different things in sports today. The first is that it's not fun to watch, especially that sequence where it was just offsides, because it's like you really have no hope of stopping it when it's that close to the goal. So that, you're trying everything, you're jumping over the line and everything, you're trying everything you can. The refs being like, we can just give you a score if you keep doing this. To me, it's like, well, that's silly. Make them keep doing it until it's done, But I digress on that point. But it's not fun, and I would enjoy more creativity and seeing some different looks and more creative ways to score. That being said, it works. I mean, it just simply works, and I don't see there's no reason why the Eagles should stop doing it as long as it's working. And now, if the NFL wants to step in and somehow make it illegal to do this, I mean, I'm open to suggestions on how that's done. But to me, it's like it's just if you're the Eagles, you need 1 or 2 yards. Yeah, you're going to run that play, and I don't blame them. Do I love it? No, but I don't blame them for doing it. And I think I said last week in our draft that Josh Allen can do it just as well, and we'll get to that game. I was wrong. I was wrong about that. Clearly, the Eagles have something here that is different than what other teams are able to do. Because, there's been quarterback sneaks forever. Tom Brady used to do it. And before that, I mean, it was a play on backyard football that I could do, was a quarterback sneak. So it's been around forever. But there's just something different about what the Eagles can do with it. Should we punish a team for finding a way to be successful? I don't necessarily think so, but I'm interested to hear arguments for how we could possibly even the playing field on this.
Yeah. Man, I have so much I could say. I agree. I think that it's entirely not fun. It's uncreative. Someone in our group chat was like, "This is unethical football." It's kind of just this thing. Like they've basically found like their little cheat code, right? Like anytime you have a play that has I mean, obviously it dipped a little bit without Jason Kelce, but even without Jason Kelce, it's working at like a 90 plus 95% success rate when it comes to getting those short yardage conversions. That's not typically sports in any facet. I don't know a single major sport where something has that high of a success rate. And if it did, it typically gets dealt with quickly. That being said, I think my only thing that bothers me when it comes to this tush push stuff is like we get those offsides calls. And granted, the ones where he's flying over the center, yeah, those are offsides, right? Like you can't really argue with that. But the thing that makes me mad is that what seemingly never gets to be called is that almost all 5 of the Eagles' offensive linemen are equally offsides. If you look at any of the photos, I mean, you can just go on Google and literally search up tush push line of scrimmage photos, and you'll see it's five Eagles linemen with their heads at or above where the football is. And it's the same thing going the other way. I mean, these are people who are starting basically shoulder to shoulder like it's a rugby scrum. That's not in the rules. Like, that's not by the rules, by the actual word of the football law. That is not allowed on either side.
I would compare offsides in the NFL right now in a general sense
Mhm.
to traveling in the NBA, where it's like I see it like at least like 90% more times than it's actually called. And so how they determine when to call it is kind of annoying, but you can continue your point. Yes.
No, and I 100% agree. I think that's like the perfect analogy of like, why do the refs let certain things go and not others? And I think it's that this play is making it an issue. Because at the end of the day, this play is only being used when they need, a yard, maybe at most 2 yards. But that's when those extra inches, that's when that extra space makes the difference. And the Eagles have kind of figured out, like, hey, we're really good at this thing, and we can take advantage of a rule that the refs don't seem to call. And so when I look at this and I'm just like, I think if there was anything I would change about it, let them keep running it, because at the end of the day, I don't know how you can, by rule, take this play out without getting rid of the quarterback sneak as a whole, which I think is, like you said, kind of not football. The quarterback sneak is forever has been a like big part of football in short yardage situations. But if you were to just simply like increase the amount that you held them accountable at the line of scrimmage to, you can't be ahead of it, right? Like in a classic, if
Just
we
call
look
the
at the
rule how it's written.
exactly, dude, exactly like it how the rule is written, you are not enforcing. And I think about this, people were complaining about this so much at the beginning of the year and even last year with the Chiefs, right? With Jawan Taylor at right tackle, because he's lined up so far back from that ball, and then he's taking his little like jump step before the ball snap.
Well,
That's the it.
it's called so infrequently that Patrick Mahomes bitched and moaned for like an entire week after they lost the regular season game to the Bills, because their on offsides was correctly called.
Mm-hmm,
And he was
mm-hmm.
just mad because it's like, oh, you can't call it in that situation. It's like, wait, I for any rule in any sport, take the situation out of it. If it's against the rules, you
Mm-hmm.
must call it. That's how I feel about literally any sport.
Yep.
That I mean that they bring that up for pass interference calls a lot, and it
Pass interference, you can bring it up for a lot of, the physicality of basketball in those last, 30
yeah.
seconds. It's like they let people start getting their elbows in and they let people start making contact on the shot. And it's like, what's the point of rules if they get taken out in moments, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the biggest moments should still need to be played within the rules. And I think that's the issue is in football, there's not a bigger moment than a touchdown, right? That is the pinnacle of success for football is touchdown. These are basically guaranteed from within the 2 yard line. I could argue if it's a first and goal, they could probably do this from 8 yards out and eventually get it.
Right, yeah.
And so it's just one of those things where I'm like, if that's the case and this is supposed to be the big moment, the big, you know, because that game, those runs by Saquon are so exciting. And watching him, sprint through defense, hit the hole, and just take off for a touchdown, like that's so fun. That's football. Watching them, or watching half of the time, it's always like Saquon or someone gets tackled at the 2 yard line, the 3 yard, and everybody's like, "Oh, here we go again." And it just becomes this thing that like takes away from, I think, the game and what was to that point probably a really good drive, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it takes away even from what the Eagles are doing, because if you just turned around and hand the ball to Saquon, the dude's going to get in. If you
Yeah.
didn't do the tush push and you just did a more standard, quarterback sneak, you're probably getting in. I mean, dude, I don't know what the career is, but Tom Brady also has a like super high success rate on quarterback sneaks. Like
Mm-hmm.
when he did quarterback sneaks, I want to say it was like 75, 80% plus, where like it's a successful play for a reason, but just the way they're doing it feels like they're taking every bit of like leverage and leeway that the league will give them, and then they're using it against the team. And then to make that worse, the thing that really pissed me off about the playoff game, why are you going on 2 or 3? Why are we sitting here calling?
When you
You're
know you're
at
going
the
to score anyway.
you know
Yeah.
you're going to score. It was like second down or first down, and you are at the literal like 6 inch line, and you're sitting
You're
here,
trying to draw
calling.
a half the
You're
distance to the goal.
Yeah, and for what if
Right.
not just to like piss off the other team? And it's like, the term I feel like used to get thrown around a lot. I don't hear it anymore these days, but it's kind of just it feels bush league. Like
Yeah.
it feels like you're doing something cheesy. And people talk about it with trick plays at the Pop Warner and high school level where it's like, oh, have the quarterback come over to the sideline and pretend he's talking to the coach, and then and it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, it's cool and it was fun for like a one-time thing, but if that becomes the staple of your offense, it to me it's just, and I don't know if this is even the right wording for it, but it just feels like an identity issue or a branding issue or something, because it's just it takes away from the game. Like I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't know if I have other words to
I,
say that in. It's just
I can
it makes
agree.
me so mad.
I really agree with pretty much everything you said. I mean, like call the rules as they're written
Hmm.
across the board. I have never looked close enough to realize what you said about them being offsides, but yeah, I mean, if that's definitely a problem. And then yeah, it's silly when it's like, okay, what you think? Do you honestly think they're going to stop you right here? And if they do, you can't just like come up with another play to get 2 yards, you know? So yeah, drawing him off sides was silly to me. And then, but yeah, like I don't know what else you can do about it, because at the end of the day, it's a completely legal play that any team it can do. Like any other team could implement this into their playbook. I just don't know if anyone will be as successful as the Eagles. They just have become the best at it, and I don't know if it's a Jalen Hurts thing, if it's an offensive line thing, if it's a combination. But I don't necessarily want to punish them for being good at something, but I also would like to see more creativity from them.
Dude, so I just sent a picture of you guys from the aerial view from the tush push in the game. So by word of the rule, a lineman's full head has to be behind the football. It cannot be in line with the football. It cannot be ahead of the football. I am looking here at this play, and granted, 93 right there, who got called for offsides on this snap, is offsides. But so is 69. He cannot have his head over the ball as a center. I played center. I know that. 77 is offsides. 56 is offsides. 68 offsides. 65 might not be. It's a little hard to tell, but 65 very well
You only
could
need
be.
one person to be offsides.
But you only need one. And I just listed four. And it's 4-1. Only one person on the Commanders is offsides, and it's four on the Eagles. And so I'm like, when I look at that picture, it just frustrates me because it's like they're just taking advantage of a rule that's not being called. And I think it's like you said, we see that in basketball with travel all the time, right? Like half the time people make these great drives or these like sick moves into the paint. It's honestly because they were able to travel. They pick up the ball and they start running like crazy. And it's the same thing with this. Like it at first when it was kind of a novel thing and it was new, it felt fun. But now it just feels like a blatant like taking advantage of a rule. And
it's
I never appreciate when teams start to do that.
it's
Uh,
SpongeBob ripping his pants, you know.
actually. But yeah, so
Yeah.
yeah, that picture I think just kind of shows it all. Your helmet cannot be at the same point of the ball, the back end of the ball. It has to be behind that, and then you have to be within the hip of the offense. I could go into the actual like real small details of how an offensive line is supposed to be set up, but that picture, it's illegal. What they're doing is fully illegal, and Washington got called for it.
Yeah,
Feels
and
bad.
maybe in an off season episode, when football's in the off season, we can dive a little bit more into technicality. Maybe we can make that a bonus or something. We can make it a bonus episode. But for now, let's close the book on the NFC Championship. Say goodbye to the Fighting Dan Quinns. You were great. We love you. Hope you're back again next year and are good. But let's move on to the AFC Championship, another game that was played also. A much better game as far as score is concerned. It was close the whole way through. Ultimately, as we said, the Chiefs were victorious over the Bills. And I think what defined this game was the difference in the coaching in high leverage, short yardage situations. You saw the Bills really pound one certain play into the ground here. And in all short yardage situations that we saw, and in a lot of high leverage situations too, and that was basically their version of the tush push. It doesn't go up the middle, it goes off to the left, but it's their version of it, right? I understand the idea of dancing with the one that brought you. I understand the idea of sticking with what you've done that got you to this point. But what do you guys think about after the first couple times that the Chiefs clearly showed they had a plan for how to stop this? What would you have done in those situations if you were play calling for the Bills?
I would have. I assume they have other short yardage plays in their book, and I would even run. You could run that same play, but do it to the right guard or do it to like right under center or something. Like I know it's worked for them very often, but like at a certain point, it's like, hey, look, they have an answer for this, and if you want to win this game, like you got to try something else. You just got to. So I don't, again, not a big X's and O's guys, but I just didn't love seeing that over and over not working.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I mean, I think we talked about it when we did our draft last week of James Cook surprisingly led the league in rushing touchdowns this year. Um, that's the guy they refused to let have these short yardage situations, is a guy who led the league in short yardage situations. Um, and a lot of that, I believe, comes off of the fact that Josh Allen is such a threat down there that James Cook probably gets a little bit of a softer look from a defense. That being said, when you start to see that Josh Allen's getting stuffed, I mean, dude, take advantage of that. That means that there's other places that are being open, because if you're going to stop a guy like Josh Allen on a 1 yard play, through the guard, you're gonna have to address that early in the down. Like the defense has to be shooting that gap, which means that there's going to be openings elsewhere. And I think what I didn't love about the Bills is it felt like the offense was playing so scared. And I don't know if you guys felt that way, but so many of the play calls, it just felt like were these little like bubble screens and these little just like wraparounds, and there was nothing aggressive about it. And then it came to short yardage, and all you can do is, like you're saying, Dallas, like, hey, this is our guy, this is who got us here. Like, let's just leave it to him to beat whoever's in front of him. And it's like, I would take Josh Allen against most players. But if those players are also like, I don't know, maybe Chris Jones, probably not. Yeah, maybe crazy thinking, but I probably am not just running him straight into Chris Jones every play. I would argue going away from that would be better. Um, and yeah, I like you're saying, it just felt like a coaching masterclass by the Chiefs. I mean, Josh Allen was a little bit of a superhero in the game, and still just it felt like he was running against a wall. Like it just the coaching staff continuously put him into scenarios where he had to will the Bills to success rather than finding himself in advantageous positions. Um, which doesn't you can't ride that forever. That type of stuff can get you a Super Bowl appearance, but when you're talking about facing the best of the best, like at some point you're going to run into the team that knows how to shut that type of stuff down.
What I found frustrating on the coaching side of things is that we've talked about the Chiefs in our past couple episodes. Like this year's Chiefs team just did not seem super dominant on the offensive side of the ball. They had not scored 30 points in a game at all in any single game to this point. And they do it in the AFC Championship game against a Bills team that has played them in how many straight regular seasons, and not to mention this is their fourth playoff matchup. I just like, I mean, credit to Andy Reid, credit to Patrick Mahomes, credit to that offense for looking like the vintage Chiefs offense that we've come to know, uh, basically looking unstoppable at points in the game. But like, how do you? I, and again, I'm gonna just beat this into the ground. I'm not an X's and O's guys. I couldn't like look at this game and be like, oh, here's what the Bills are doing wrong. But it's like you gotta. I mean, teams have been able to do it this year. Teams have been able to keep the Chiefs offense uh, to below 30 points. Every single team that played them. So to not be able to do it here when you score 29, which would have beat the Chiefs in, say it again, every other game they've played this year. Uh, that's just I think it's a coaching thing more than anything else. And um, I think, at the end of the day, it just Patrick Mahomes is the been there, done that guy, and Josh Allen is the desperately trying to get there guy. And I think there's a big advantage in being the been there, done that.
Dude, 100%. And I think what you're saying too, like, it really does come down to this like interesting conversation of, and I'll make sure this gets back on point quickly, but like this off season, there was, some talk about do the Pittsburgh Steelers move on from a coach like Mike Tomlin, right? And Mike Tomlin is considered a great coach. He's considered a great culture setting coach. He's never had a losing season, but also the last time he won a playoff game, I was a child. And so it's just like, at what point do we take success in the regular season and start to think maybe it's still not meeting our standards if you're really serious about winning a Super Bowl?
Mm-hmm.
And I think Sean McDermott's going to start getting to that point in that conversation because Sean McDermott's a defensive coach, right? Like he's the defensive play caller, he's a defensive coach, and the whole thing was always he's got Superman on the other side and he can coach a great defense. And that's kind of what's been their thing for the past 4 or 5 years, it feels like, is a great defense led by a playmaker at quarterback. And when you go through and you look at their last 4 games, they've lost 4 years in a row. Nope, 4 out of the last 5 years, they've been in losses to the Chiefs. 21, 22, 24, and then this year. Those games, they've given up 32, 27, 42, and 38. They give up an average of 34.75 points a game to the Chiefs in playoffs. You are a coach who specializes on defense. You are a coach who's seen these guys more than anyone outside of their division. And you have not come up with a way to get that number down to even like a respectful mid-20s, right? You give up 28 points and you're still kind of like, that's a tough game for the defense. But when you're routinely giving up 30s and in one game 42 points, I mean, Josh Allen can only do so much, right? And the Chiefs, like we've talked about, they've actually improved their defense and their defense seems to just be getting better. And on the flip side, it feels like Josh Allen's defense just continues to let him down. And I mean, we can go back as the game where Josh Allen scores with 13 seconds.
Yeah.
There's not a better, full circle just wrap up of what Josh Allen has had to deal with than he gave them the lead with 13 seconds to go against Patrick Mahomes and lost. That is where Josh Allen is at.
And not on like a Hail Mary miracle.
No.
Either. Just a couple of just basic
a methodical
plays.
drive. Just a methodical drive. And so that's where I look at that and I think Josh Allen is such a good player, and I have so much respect for Josh Allen as a quarterback. And to see him have to deal with a defensive head coach who invests so heavily on the defense, I mean, it sucks, dude. Like, it sucks. And I would love to have seen the Bills have their chance at a Super Bowl. But yeah, it's just the coaching staffs were night and day in this game, and unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know. I actually do like Andy Reid as well, and Steve Spagnuolo's got a weird soft spot for me, even though he sucked for the Rams. Like, it's just the coaching was insane. I can't believe Sean McDermott is still not on a hot seat.
I think you make a good point with that. Like, we need to bring back Super Bowl or bust mentality. Um, and with that is, hey, we may be like consistently making the playoffs, but we're not getting over that hump. We need to make a change to get over that hump. I remember when the Broncos they went to the Super Bowl and got destroyed by the Seahawks, and the next year they won the division, had a bye, and lost to the Colts in at home in a um, divisional round playoff. And they fired John Fox after that. And it was like kind of surprising probably to a lot of people. He had been their coach for only a few years. He made the playoffs with Tim Tebow. Um, but they're like, you know what? We need we need to win the Super Bowl. We don't need to just make the playoffs. And so I like that attitude. I think yeah, like Mike Tomlin gets a ton of credit for all those winning seasons. You're right though. He also hasn't done anything noteworthy in years. He doesn't have a coaching tree the way other uh, legendary head coaches do. So yeah, I question. I I think we need to be quicker, like we are with quarterbacks, at least in the in the fan world of like, if he's not getting it done, you need to find the guy who will. And I think we need to have that mindset with coaching.
Yeah, it's such a tough balance when it comes to that stuff because I think there's a time and a place for both to be right.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think sometimes we seem to be a little quick to pull the trigger on a coach, and at other times, I think people have clearly run their course. But at the end of the day, Super Bowl windows are typically so short and so small. If you are actually in one, and I think that maybe that comes down to ownership and, administration and stuff, is like being able to accurately self-scout and say, are we in a real Super Bowl window? Or are we one of those Cinderella story outside shots at making it? Because if you are in an actual Super Bowl window, you absolutely need to make every move possible to make it happen because those typically aren't open for very long, right? It's the reason that it's crazy that the Chiefs are doing what they're doing. Most teams start to suffer 1 to 2 years after a Super Bowl appearance because they've had to push so many chips in. And it's not very often you find a coach that can bring it out of a super team like the Chiefs, right? And make that happen. And it's the reason Tom Brady and Bill Belichick were so special. And, it's the best coaches of our generation right now. I mean, you look at a Kyle Shanahan or a Sean McVay or Mike Tomlin or any of these guys, even the Harbaugh, right? Jim Harbaugh, like, and John Harbaugh. These are dudes who just win a lot, and yet
Kyle
not a lot
Shanahan
of
hasn't
Super
gotten over the hump though.
Kyle Shanahan's never gone over the hump. And it's just right. And you look at these things, it's like I don't think that you necessarily want to sacrifice your great coaches in exchange for, whatever, but like people need to understand the value of a Super Bowl. And I feel like it's gotten lost in the Tom Brady into Patrick Mahomes era is it's not normal to do what they do. And you need to remember that football outside of those two doesn't look like that. And it never has. And I can almost guarantee post Mahomes and Reed, it never will for a long time.
Well, and
And
even
it's
Tom
just,
Brady, it was like he won six with the Patriots over like a 19-year span. For Mahomes and Andy Reid and the Chiefs, this is about to be four in a 6-year span. Like that's even different than Brady, you know. Uh,
and it's just, it feels like Brady's, what everyone felt about Brady, this is just being taken to a new extreme because they are doing it so much quicker.
hmm.
And so that's where I'm just like, I don't think people really understand that this isn't what football has been for so long. And capitalizing on these windows of, 2, 3 year opportunities where the salary caps and contracts work out that you can push your chips in. That's what football typically looks like. And I don't know. It brings up an interesting conversation with these coaches because you want to have consistency in your building. You want to have consistency for your players. And at the same time, if a guy continuously leads you, because like I think there's one podcast I was watching and he kind of said it better than I could, and it's like there's nothing worse than being average in sports. Because at least if you're the worst, you get the best picks. You get the best opportunity to get new talent. You get all this. If you're average and you're, let's say, the Steelers, and you are just out in the divisional round with the worst record in playoffs every year, you're always picking between like 22 and 25. That sucks. Like the hit rate at 22 to 25 is so much lower than if you're in the top 10, the top 5, right? Every bracket you go down, it gets harder and harder to find
Yeah.
the truly, exceptional talents. And I mean, you can kind of see it in the way their team is built right now is like name a true superstar outside of TJ Watt. Do they have one? I would argue no. They traded for Minka Fitzpatrick. Their team is kind of just the definition of average at this point. And I think that's because of years and like legitimately like a generation of mid picks, of just average picks. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, and to put a little bit of a button on the coaching in this game conversation, just I wanted to shout out Spags, man. He dialing up that corner blitz on that last fourth down. I mean, good grief, sending two corners in a situation like that can blow up, and often does most of the time blow up in your face. But he just knew the timing was right, and he knew how to send it, and the Bills weren't ready. And, Josh Allen went up there, took a look. He saw what he thought it looked like. He assigned the protection, and it didn't work because they had corners coming from that one side, two of them. And it was just like crazy, so I appreciate the coaching mismatch in this game as well.
And I still think Kincaid could have made a play on that ball.
Right.
I mean, absolutely.
Right. And that'll forever be, that thing. You have, tight ends are having a little bit of a rough go this postseason. You have Mark Andrews the week before, just blatantly dropping one, that, and then fumbling earlier too in that game. But, and
Who's
then you
his
have,
worst?
poor Kincaid.
Andrews is worse.
Andrews is worse. Yeah.
It was in his hands.
Yeah.
It was in Kincaid's hands too.
I mean, that's like a dump off pass. I mean, it was, maybe they still don't win because it would have tied the game and whatever. But
I was going to say, I don't know if I disagree with you, but I'm also like, Kincaid makes that catch, which, like, granted, it's in the biggest moment of his career to date. A lot of pressure. But, like, you would be lying if you said you hadn't seen, like, your cousin make that type of catch at Thanksgiving. Like, a lot of people make a catch where they fall backwards and catch it right here.
Yeah. But yeah, so, I think we all agree if the Bills are ever going to do this, they need to make some changes. So Bills, I know you're listening, make some changes and, let's see what happens. I think, so we close the book on that, Bills, we'll see you back here, in no time at all. I'm sure we'll have more of these, matchups between the Chiefs and the Bills coming down the line, in the playoffs. But want to move on from those games. They ended how they ended. We'll talk Super Bowl next week and the result of that. But, I think the world is clamoring for more coaching talk. We've talked about coaching a little bit in the last few minutes. And let's talk more about coaching, because a lot of teams have hired coaches to be their head coaches in the last few weeks. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, almost everybody who needs a coach has one. The Saints might call me. I don't know. I think maybe they're thinking about it. I think I might be the only one left. But let's go ahead and before we talk about what we think about these hires, let's run down what they are. So starting with the Dallas Cowboys, they hired Brian Schottenheimer, who is a coach now. He's a coach, and his previous job obviously was the offensive coordinator in Dallas. He was a non-play caller though, so he'll have someone probably take over that spot for him. The Las Vegas Raiders hired my man Pete Carroll. Previous job
Nice.
also. Job also, obviously head coach of the Seahawks. Last year he took the year off though, didn't coach. The Jacksonville Jaguars hired Liam Cohen,
Duval.
and he gave us that wonderful Duval. That look, if he's a good coach, I'll talk about this later. Anyway, his previous job was Bucks OC. He was the play caller there, so he might do the same. The Jets hired Aaron Glenn, former defensive coordinator of the Lions. He was a play caller on that side too. Patriots hired Mike Vrabel, who last was the head coach of the Titans. Last year did not coach. The Bears hired Ben Johnson, who was the Lions offensive coordinator. He called plays over there. So wanted to do a little, best match, worst match that you guys see of this list. Just what you think about, some of these hires in general. But yeah, give me your best match and your worst match. We'll go from there. Let's start with Drew.
Yeah, I have a best match, worst match. I also have a most boring hire and a most interesting hire. So I can do that after. But I think the worst match, I'll start with worst. The worst match is Brian Schottenheimer with the Cowboys. I think it just kind of seemed like there was some really like crazy names thrown out. Like Deion Sanders was thrown out at one point for the Cowboys job. Belichick was brought up in at least in like a social media sense. Like it seemed like, oh, he hasn't signed his contract yet with North Carolina, whatever. There's just a lot of ways you can go, and I like as little success as the Cowboys have had in the last 30 years, it's still like that's a big ticket job, and that's you're going to be on a lot of national televised games, and you're going to be like it's America's team, right? The Cowboys. So to go with their in-house offensive coordinator after getting rid of your offensive-minded head coach, the guy who doesn't call plays. I kind of disagree with you, Dallas. I think he might start calling plays because now he's the man, right? He can do whatever he wants. Uh, I mean, who knows? We'll see. But like, I just think like he wasn't like a particularly groundbreaking offensive coordinator either, and that doesn't always make a difference when it comes to being a head coach. If you hire the right people under you, it doesn't really matter. But I just think that it just felt like a lot of Jerry Jones decisions, like it's a bit of a head scratcher. It's a bit of like, hey, everyone, like even me who like, you know, I shouldn't be anywhere near a football front office. Like I can tell you that this doesn't seem like a good idea. And so that's my worst match. And then my best match, uh, for me is Ben Johnson with the Bears. Ben Johnson, like you said, was the Lions offensive coordinator for the past few years. He was kind of like the hot guy the last two rounds, and both years said, actually, I want to stay in Detroit. Um, and then this year, he's finally decided to take a job. It's with the NFC North rivalry with the Bears, which is interesting to me. But I think giving him Caleb Williams, giving him a Bears team that has some guys and just needs some direction. I like it. We'll see if it ends up being good. This is kind of a crapshoot in a lot of ways, hiring someone who's never been a head coach before. But I think that's the exciting pick. The same way, I'm not going to say he's going to have the same level of success, but like the same way Sean McVay was an exciting hire when the Rams did it, the same way Kevin O'Connell was an exciting hire when the Vikings did it. It's the flashy new offensive-minded coach. He's got the young quarterback that was the number one overall pick last year. I like it. I think that's going to be an exciting team.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback off that because I'm not going to talk about Ben Johnson for mine. He also is doing it the right way, in my opinion. He's bringing in a veteran defensive coordinator as well, who has a lot of head coaching experience in Dennis Allen. Say what you want about the Saints, their defense is outside of this year not really been the issue. So I do agree. I think he's doing it right. I'm excited to see what the Bears do there. I'll start from the top though. Worst, I mean, come on, it's the Cowboys. It's not really. it's pretty obvious, like the Brian Schottenheimer thing, another ex-Rams coach that I got the pleasure of suffering through for some years. Um, Cowboys fans, I mean, my time with Brian Schottenheimer built up a lot of character for me, so hopefully it does the same for you. Um, it really tests your loyalty. It makes you prove that you love the team. So I'm excited to see how many real Cowboy fans there are after this full experiment. Schottenheimer is crazy enough. Stack that with the fact that his defensive coordinator is Matt Eberflus, um, maybe one of the biggest memed coaches of the last few years. And I mean, it's just an all-time like meme squad over there. I don't understand quite what they were thinking. They have so much young talent on that team and guys who are still needing to get paid. And I'm like, I don't think you're convincing Micah Parsons that Matt Eberflus is the guy to attach your career to. Um, that's a whole different topic, but worst is by far the Cowboys. I mean, there were so many people, like you were saying, Drew, that could have been on this list as a Cowboys coach, and for them to have pulled Brian Schottenheimer is insane. Especially with some of the names that are still out there. I mean, there's still some good coaches out there waiting. Um, but no need to bag on them further. Best, I mean, right now, if we're talking about just choices made from a coach, it's got to be New Orleans. Their situation is garbage. I I don't know who in their right mind would choose to coach the Saints right now. Like, genuinely speaking, one of the worst setup teams I've ever seen ever. It's just a bunch of old guys who are getting paid a lot of money, young guys who are not that good and need to be paid money, and a lot of dead money, and not a lot of picks. And there's not a lot there. But I mean, realistically, my favorite pick of this entire thing's got to be Pete, though. I think Pete to the Raiders, one is so sick, but two, I feel like it's the first time they've made a pick that brings stability to a team. Pete is just a man of tradition. Going back, I'm a USC guy. He was there in my childhood, built a dynasty, the whole shebang. But you're talking about a man who knows how to build a program, and whether or not it's the most flashy, whether or not it's going to be the most successful is besides the point. It finally brings like a sense of stability to the Raiders, which I think they haven't had for a long time. They've had a lot of coaches that kind of feel like they were out of place as coaches. Um, and Pete's not going to be that. Pete, he's got his thing. He's going to do it, and he's going to make his system work. So yeah, I mean, I think that, and then you can't bring up Pete without talking about the fact that, I mean, he's back against Harbaugh, man. Like you're talking about like the rivalry of the century here in football. Like outside of teams, Pete versus Jim Harbaugh is one of the funniest rivalries to ever exist, in my opinion. It's just an old man pissing off another football guy. And that's hilarious to me. And the way that they're so petty with each other, I'm excited to see that. Raiders versus Chargers is going to be funny.
Yeah, I find that fun too, and that's I'll just go off what you just said because that is my most interesting pick was Pete Carroll to the Raiders. It kind of came out of nowhere in my mind. Like it seemed like maybe Pete Carroll, maybe it wasn't his decision, but maybe had coached his last game. But I'm happy for him. Got a job. I think it's interesting because he's going to be the oldest head coach, and he's Raiders team that didn't do well last year. Don't really have a quarterback. There's a lot to be done. But they got the nice stadium out in Vegas, and
Oh, there's some quarterbacks out there for him.
well, yes. We'll see if Russ and Pete reunite. But I just think, it's funny because I liked USC when I was a kid too, and I have a different perspective on Pete Carroll because I get annoyed because it's like, oh, you left right before all the punishments came out, and went and then destroyed the Broncos in the Super Bowl. But all that being said, I think it's you're right. It's like that's a stability. That's a guy who knows what he's doing. Like, he knows how to run a football team. He knows how to, uh, be the rah rah kind of head coach that guys can rally around, especially young guys. He's a defender of his players and everything. I think it's a good hire. I think the Harbaugh thing's interesting, and that's my division. Being a Broncos fan, that's got to be far and away the most interesting coaching division because you've got Andy Reid and Sean Payton. Also, like, just every single coach there has some kind of drama or legacy or history behind them. Um, and yeah, it's gonna be fun to watch. I still think doesn't necessarily, and we'll see what roster moves happen, doesn't necessarily move the needle for me in terms of where the Raiders are in this division. Like, I think they're still definitely the worst team, and I don't know if a head coach can fix that instantaneously, but I like it, and it makes me a little bit nervous. I'm not gonna lie, as a Broncos fan, like, I think he's a guy who can kind of get a team to rally around, which is kind of interesting because Pierce, the Raiders coach that just got fired, he was the interim coach for the second half of the previous season. And didn't Max Crosby go like, I will ask for a trade if you do not hire him as the full time head coach? And so they were like, okay, I guess we'll do that. And then uh, he lasted one season. So I guess, maybe don't always listen to what the players are asking for is the lesson. Um, but yeah, that's the most interesting hire to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I know Max Crosby said like Pete Carroll already reached out and they've kind of, you know, they've come to terms of Max Crosby's going to be a Raider and, they're going to move forward and he's going to kind of be a staple piece there. But have I have I told you guys about my history with Antonio Pierce?
Yes, you have.
Dude, the craziest thing is because when he got hired, I had no idea who he was. And then my dad calls me and he's like, Matthew, did you see your old coach just got hired to coach the Raiders? And I was like, what? And I look and dude, there's just pictures, like team pics, just me and Antonio Pierce. I was just this like chunky little 8-year-old boy trying to learn football. But I think it's so funny that that man was literally a coach, and I don't know like I don't know his previous coaching history very well, but it feels like he shot up ranks quickly without really ever having a specialty. Like, I'm not sure exactly what that man's did, but nothing but respect to Antonio Pierce, my coach.
Yeah, absolutely. Pete, to be the coach that came before Pete, that's going to be pretty tough. No matter how Pete's tenure goes as far as Super Bowl or playoffs or whatever, I think to be the coach that came before Pete is going to be tough because a lot of those players are going to talk really highly about Pete when this is all over. And, I know that from experience. But I do want, Drew, you had a boring pick as well. Go ahead and hit us with that.
Yeah. And I could have, Brian Schottenheimer could have been the boring pick, but to me,
Yeah.
Mike Vrabel getting hired by the Patriots is kind of boring to me. I'm not saying it's bad. I don't necessarily think that it will be bad, but they had Belichick forever, and he's going to go down in history as one of the great head coaches. Um, and then they hired Gerard Mayo last year in a weird kind of like they didn't really interview anyone, and then it came out that they had this succession plan for years where Mayo was going to be the guy, and it just felt very strange, and it obviously didn't work. He only lasted 1 year, and they were right to fire him based on the year they had. But it seemed like, because I don't remember the exact timeline, but I think he was the first coach hired, Mike Vrabel, in this cycle. I think they were the first team to
Yeah.
check off their list, and um,
Well, yeah, there's all
like
the controversy because of the Looney Rule stuff.
yeah, and it seemed like they didn't interview that many people, and it was like, okay, so Mike Vrabel, he at least has head coaching experience, and he has success. Like, the Titans made the playoffs under him a few times, and they never seemed to have that amazing of a roster, this and that. But at the end of the day, you're just hiring another linebacker that played for your team in the glory days. I just, it just, it's boring. It doesn't excite me. It's not creative. It was kind of when Mayo was fired, it was the name we saw the most, and then it was the name they ended up with. So it's just kind of boring. We'll see. I like Drake May. He seems like he might have it.
Well, dude,
We'll see what happens.
to pile on top of that, do you see who their offensive coordinator is?
Yeah, yeah. They brought back
Yeah,
Josh
it's just
McDaniels.
Josh McDaniels.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm literally just looking at, Patriots like news right now, and it's just the top articles. Why James White thinks McDaniels is perfect hire. Why
Mm.
Josh McDaniels' diverse system is perfect for the Patriots, according to Amendola. Why Julian Edelman thinks that or is excited to see Josh and it's like, great. So it's basically just a giant like nepotism chamber, a giant echo chamber in the
Relive in the glory
organization.
days. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
it's
again,
like
like I don't know if Josh McDaniels will be bad at that job. He was good at it before, but it's just
he's
like
been a great coordinator.
it's not inspired. It's not like
It's not inspired, and especially like one of the articles right here, they only looking at this, it says they only interviewed two people for the offensive coordinator position. It was Eric Bieniemy and Josh McDaniels.
the enemy who can't
Big
keep
enemy.
a college job now at this point. Yeah.
Yeah.
It truly, like you're saying, I think it's just one of the most uninspired off-season looks I've seen in a while.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with all those points. But yeah, I mean, Pete being back is just the thing that took the headline for me, man. I'm looking forward to. I watched his press conference just because I love him and can't get enough. And
Marshawn
Marshawn
made
was
an
there.
appearance. Yeah.
Yeah, Marshawn was there, and I'm like, dang, man, that's gonna go off. That's gonna be so fun. So whether you win or lose a lot, Raiders, you're gonna have some fun. Wrapping up NFL, I wanted to with some early mock drafts have come out. We want to hit those real quick. So I thought maybe we'd each go, talk about our team for a couple minutes. These are very early mock drafts, but we thought it might be fun to get into it a little bit. So I'll start with the Seahawks. These are mock drafts from NFL Network, folks. It looks like they've got one has the Seahawks going with an offensive lineman, the other has defensive lineman. So look, the Seahawks needs are various. I think, but those are the places where they need is in the trenches. The Seahawks. The biggest problem for them this year was the offensive line, though. For me, watching those games, I watched all of them. I think, and it's been the problem for so long. And I feel bad for Ryan Grubb, to be honest with you, because you get your shot in the NFL. You've never been a coordinator in the NFL before, never been a coach in the NFL before. You go from somewhere like UW, where he had this offensive line that was just phenomenal. Then you get your shot in the NFL, and your shot's with Seattle, who might as well be starting me on the offensive line. I mean, these guys are terrible. There's two linemen that we started this year that I would want back next year. If I had the option to replace all the rest of them, I would. They're awful. And so for me, and this is where John Schneider comes into the conversation, his philosophy on offensive line is very well known. He thinks that especially interior offensive linemen are overdrafted and overpaid. He said that before. And so this is why we have these problems, because the guy who's in charge of making the picks, even though Pete was kind of in charge of making the picks before, like in a very, it was more of a, 60-40, however you want to split that thing with Pete and him. But now that he's in charge of making the picks, this is why we have these problems, because there is no investment in the offensive line. The proper investment isn't there, in my opinion. So if I'm asking to choose between these couple of mock drafts, one goes defensive line, one goes offensive line, give me the offensive line. And for the last 6 or 7 years in a row, all I've said in their first round is just take the best offensive lineman on the board. I don't care. Take them. And they're going to have to do it at some point. And so you take advantage of a situation right now where these typical high value positions in the draft, you got things like corner, you have pass rushers, you have even wide receivers to a degree, and quarterback, right? Seattle's pretty settled in all those areas. They could use some more pass rushers. They sure could. But in those other areas, they've got what they need. I'm a Geno guy, so I think they have what they need at the quarterback position. So you think about you're set at some of these high leverage, or high value positions right now. So use your first round pick on an offensive lineman for once in your life when you can actually afford to do so. That's what I would say. If we're talking about where we're at with these mock drafts that have come out so far, I'm going with the one that gives us an offensive lineman. The Broncos pick next in the order. Seahawks are 18, Broncos are 20, and so let's shoot it over to Drew and see what your thoughts are.
Yeah, well, I just want to preface by saying, like, I'm not the biggest college football guy. I'm not the biggest draft follower year to year. There's certain years where I get more into it. Like last year, Broncos picked 12th. There was a lot of quarterbacks. I was invested in that. And when we get closer to the draft, I inevitably get more interested. So I do think it's funny when we have these mock drafts. Like the Super Bowl hasn't even happened yet. But it's good fun. Both of these from NFL Network, it's Bucky Brooks and Daniel Jeremiah. Both of them have the Broncos taking a safety in the first round. Two different guys. Bucky Brooks has Malachi Starks from University of Georgia, and then Daniel Jeremiah has Nick. I'm going to try this last name, Emenwari from South Carolina. Great. I don't know these guys personally. Like I said, I'm not gonna, but I do think the theme of it being a safety tracks with what the Broncos have and need. Had a pretty magical year to even make the playoffs with the huge dead cap hit from Russell Wilson, a rookie quarterback that, let's face it, a lot of people laughed at the pick at the time. They thought it was kind of a desperation pick, and it looks like he's probably going to be second place rookie of the year on the offensive side, possibly. Bo Nix, yeah, he's a finalist, so good for him. And they were able to lock guys up. Garrett Bowles is coming back at left tackle. Jonathan Cooper signed an extension. You got Nick Bonito, who emerged this year as a real defensive threat. And of course, you got Pat Surtain as, in my opinion, the best cornerback in football. And a lot of young wide receivers behind Courtland Sutton. So there's a lot of different things you could do. I like the idea of getting a safety back there, really strengthening the secondary. To me, that sounds good. When you're picking 20th, like you kind of mentioned with the Steelers earlier, you're not necessarily going to get the super high profile names, but you can definitely get a guy. And I remember we picked, I believe it was 19th or 20th pick overall when we got Garrett Bowles back in 2017, I think it was. So, you can find franchise guys there. It'd be awesome if we got a franchise safety at this pick.
Yeah, I mean, and going off that, right? Like finding some of these later in the first round guys, especially at the offensive line position. I feel like we see a lot of offensive tackles go in the second half of the first round who still end up being great players, right? It's, we might not get the superstars, but you don't always need a superstar. Sometimes you just need good players. But with that, I mean, the Rams picked 26 this year. And kind of similarly to you, Drew, and the Broncos, the NFL guys have us drafting an offensive tackle. A lot of questions about the offensive tackle position for the Rams right now. We got Jackson, who's a free agent. We got Rob Havenstein, who's 1 billion years old. Both of them could honestly be replaced this year or next. And they have us going with either Josh Simmons out of Ohio State or Josh Connerly out of Oregon. Now, I do know these guys because the draft is my shit. I'm a draft guy year round. I don't even follow college that closely, but I'll follow the draft and I will keep my marks on people and take my notes. Josh Simmons excites me more than Connerly, if I'm being honest. I think offensive tackle is absolutely the top need for the Rams right now. Just so many injuries and so much inconsistency on the offensive line, I think really came back to bite us. But Josh Simmons was talked about last year as being like a top 5 pick in this year's draft. And then he ends up getting a season ending injury this year and doesn't know the timetable of his return. With that being said, like the Rams situation right now, we have our right tackle for this next year. That's set in stone. Rob Havenstein's not going anywhere. If we franchise tag AJ Jackson and bring him back, that's on a 1 year deal. We have time for someone like a Josh Simmons to come in and kind of develop and learn. I think that could be a really good situation. But that's also, I mean, Josh Connerly's awesome. I think he did an awesome job at Oregon. They clearly had a great season too. But I don't know. I kind of like that pick. But I would throw caution to the wind, and if someone like Ashton Genty was to fall down to the back of the first, I think I'd want my Rams to pick up a guy like that. I mean, could you imagine Ashton Genty on a Sean McVay offense? It's a thing of beauty.
I refuse to imagine that.
I'll take Kyren Williams off your hands. I don't mind that at all.
I'll give Kyren Williams to you for the 20th pick.
I think in a general sense, I think I like the idea if you're picking 26, maybe if you're not picking top 10, but I like the idea of picking a guy with high upside who's coming off an injury. There's some risk involved, but like if you're getting a guy who's potential top 5 talent at number 26 and it's just, maybe it takes a year or something, I think that's well worth it.
That's exactly my thoughts.
Yeah. So we'll talk more as more mock drafts come out. We'll talk more about those kind of things. We love to talk about that. I am personally just in favor of the Rams blowing it and the Seahawks doing good. That's my draft analysis and hopes and dreams. But for now, that'll do for the NFL segment today. We want to hit a couple quick things from MLB. One thing for sure we want to talk about that came out this week. Big news for the real heads. The MLB Pipeline Top 100 prospect rankings were updated before the season start. Right, updated to include guys like, Roki Sasaki, who, have just come over now and finds himself at number 1 overall now. But there's more relevant news for this podcast, starting with the Red Sox having 2 prospects in the top 10. So just want to give Drew a chance to sort of victory lap on these guys and let us know what they're all about. Will we see him this year?
Yeah, we'll definitely see him this year, barring crazy injury or something. But yeah, it's the prospect time of year. We got the mock draft coming out in the NFL, and then not only MLB Pipeline, but Keith Law for The Athletic came out with his top 100. Baseball America came out with their top 100. It's hard to say who's the best at this. They're all vaguely similar. I would like to start by saying I don't think guys like Roki Sasaki should count. They do. They always do. But I don't think it's like, okay, well, he played professional baseball for, however many years. But yeah, so the Red Sox have 2 in the top 10. We have Roman Anthony and Christian Campbell. Plus you've got Marcelo Meyer, who's around 15 for a lot of lists. It's cool. It's Roman Anthony is pretty much the consensus number 1 prospect outside of Roki Sasaki. And that's really exciting to have. The Red Sox have had that a few times in my life, and I'm going to say the names, and you're going to be like, maybe it's not that big of a deal. Because Andrew Benintendi was the number 1 prospect in all of baseball, and he's basically a negative value player at this point. Yoan Moncada was one time the number 1 prospect in all of baseball. So you try not to get too caught up in it. At the same time, Roman Anthony is 20 years old. He tore up AA and AAA last year. He looks like the real deal, just a pure hitter. He plays all 3 outfield spots. I would guess he eventually finds his home in right field for the Red Sox. There's a lot to shake out with the roster, but I'm really excited about him. I'm glad he was not traded. I don't think he was ever really under serious consideration to be traded. It seems like they were more interested in trading guys from the major league team. And then you've got Christian Campbell, who was the minor league player of the year last year and kind of broke out. He was kind of there was like, internally he was like in the Red Sox top 10, but he wasn't really like in the league's radar too much, and then just had an outstanding year uh, between also Double A and Triple A. I would not be surprised if he cracks the Major League roster on opening day because he's a right-handed bat. He plays all over the field, um, and the Red Sox need righties. They haven't signed Alex Bregman. It kind of seems like they probably won't sign Alex Bregman. So Christian Campbell, he could be your opening day second baseman. He can be your opening day left fielder. He bats righty. Start him out batting in the bottom third of the lineup, and we'll see. I think I have a lot of faith in him being a solid major leaguer, if not necessarily a star. Um, I don't love the Red Sox necessarily like banking on these guys for their success this year because it's a lot of pressure to put on young guys. But at the same time, I really do have a lot of faith in both of them, and it's exciting, that these guys could be contributing members of the Red Sox for the next however many years.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. And as somebody who definitely knows how that feels, to have all these great prospects, I love to have all of the ones that the Angels have. They'd be honestly just too numerous to list, so I won't say any. But uh, uh, yeah. Matt? Did you get a chance to take a look at the Padres guys on this list? And what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the two guys basically that have been untouchable for the Padres since the offseason began and, trade talks and all this stuff. It's DeVries and it's Salas. We've got our two young men and they're not going anywhere. I believe DeVries is 18 and Salas is 33. I think DeVries is absolutely a year or so away from even being talked about as seeing game time action at the big leagues. I could see I could see Salas making his debut this year, if I'm being honest. I mean, we just signed Elias Diaz, who's like cool, not like the most exciting signing, but like he can hold down the position for a year.
He's a
But
he's a stopgap type of catcher.
yeah, and when we're talking about Salas has been our most, I would say, hyped prospect for the last couple of years now, being that we got him when he was like 16 or 17. It says right now he's 18. Um, but we're talking about a guy who's just got plus defense all over the board, is a solid looking hitter. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm excited about these guys. We gave up quite a few of our farm to make some of those moves last year. For better or for worse, I respect a team that tries. And yeah, I mean, I'm looking down this list. I'm like, none of our other guys are top 100. We'll
Yeah.
see if that changes throughout the year, obviously. I think we still have some pretty solid players in our farm system, but when we're talking about the guys who have a chance at, making a name for themselves, both, I mean, they're both so young, dude. They're
Ethan
both eight.
Salas specifically, I mean, he's already been on the radar for a couple of years. He was like a 16-year-old in the minor leagues. The dude's 18 right now.
Hmm.
He'll turn 19 in June. He like he hasn't played above it looks like high A. So you know either this year or next year will be his debut. But you're talking worst case scenario. He's going to be a 20-year-old rookie. He's a catcher. Like you know that's a guy you keep around. And the Padres, yeah, they may have not the strongest farm system, but clearly they have used it well to supplement the major league roster. And you don't get guys like Juan Soto without making painful trades. So
Yeah, and I have no doubt that Preller can restock a farm. I mean, he's done it before. He can do it again. He's got
mhm.
so much success in the international pool outside of Japan, that I have no doubt about it. And I mean, DeVries and Salas are both incredible starts for a farm system. And like you're saying, I mean, they're both 18. Like one will be 19 in June and the other will be 19 in October. But like they're so young still. And I don't know. I mean, I do think it's interesting. Both of their positions are fairly open at the major league level right now. Just looking at our roster, like we'll see if Xander can kind of come back to be himself at shortstop. But if he's not the future at shortstop for us, I mean, DeVries is right there. And then same thing, like you said, Diaz is a kind of stopgap catcher, and I think Salas could be up sooner than his quote unquote ETA. Like, if he proves that he can keep hitting at high levels, they brought him out the past 2 years to catch at spring training with our starting pitchers. Like, my man's got experience catching at a high level. It's more so about, is his back going to translate? And if
And
he
you
can
and
prove that
you
it can translate,
you never want to force them into a situation where it's too much on their shoulders at such a young age. Obviously, certain guys can do it, and maybe he's one of them. But I could see it depends how the season goes for the Padres. I could just see him being a little bit cautious with someone so young. But yeah, he'll definitely be a contributor at some point. And I think Xander Bogaerts, they've already shown it when they had Ha-Seong Kim. Like second base will be his home long term, and you can have DeVries step in when the time comes.
yeah, I mean, and I think you're absolutely right. I just, I look back and like you're saying, I think age 20 seems realistic for both of them to make their starts. And I look, Jackson Merrill was not
Mhm.
supposed to be on that major league roster, at least not in the starting position. And I mean, just an incredible rookie season for him. And obviously that you can't expect that from everybody, but makes me feel good about the guys we have.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. And I take the Angels' philosophy here. Why have prospects in the top 100 in your system when you can simply trade them for 20 innings of Lucas Giolito? And I think the value there is to be debated. But one last thing on the top 100, wanted to make mention of the Mariners and the Cubs being the teams with the most in the top 100, seven prospects each in that top 100. At least this is per the this is the MLB Pipeline one. And so I have a question here about the Mariners. Considering the state of their rotation, they have the best rotation in baseball, one of the best, if not the best, certainly the best in the American League. Considering the state of their rotation and the fact that that kind of stuff doesn't last forever, should they be considering trading some of these guys for bats that can help their team now? Or is it really they're going to try to wait some of these guys out to where they can make their debut?
I think they should, and I think they probably think they should. I mean, Jerry Dipoto is the trade king of Major League Baseball. Um, I think the problem is, as I look at the Mariners, I looked at the seven names in the top 100. Two of them have made it up to Double A. All the rest have not been above high A, single A.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not like knocking on the door to the major leagues, and we're just seeing a trend around Major League Baseball, and I don't know exactly what led to this, but there big trades are not being made for like I guess you call them lottery tickets. If they're far enough from the major leagues, you don't really know how good they'll be as major leaguers. And so we're just seeing fewer and fewer trades for low level minor leaguers. They're usually like the throw in piece, and especially ones that are ranked in the top 100. It's just like there's just such a, I think it's front offices have their own rankings and just maybe value guys differently, and the values just don't match up. So it would be very surprising to me if Jerry Dipoto hasn't called around trying to get a bat. Um, Now I don't know which bats are available. Like there hasn't Kyle Tucker got traded. That was within their division. Other than that, like there hasn't been a lot of chatter around bats being traded. Um, so I don't know. I mean, if I'm the Mariners, I'm signing Pete Alonso right now. Clearly, he's not getting that big deal. Just pay some money and do it. It seems like they don't want to spend any money. Um, but you're absolutely right. They've got the best rotation in the American League. I would say it was the best. I mean, statistically, it was the best rotation last year. The Dodgers have just stacked theirs to such an extent that I can't pick another team besides the Dodgers to have the best rotation. Um, Yeah, they just, I mean, their park is a factor. It's hard to hit in their park, which helps their pitchers and hurts their lineup no matter who you have. But like, yeah, Pete Alonso, he's a guy he's gonna sleepwalk to 35 home runs. Like you just gotta. It frustrates me a lot of teams in the American League right now because so much talent has left for the National League. Um,
Yeah.
and you just like there's just not a team in the American League right now where I'm like, that's it. That is the best team. That is the team that is going to go to the World Series. And so there's all these teams that are like pretty good, and it's like just go for it. Do that one more thing. With the Red Sox, it's like sign Alex Bregman. With the Mariners, I would sign Pete Alonso. Even the Yankees like sign Alex Bregman, and then and we'll get into that more as we get closer to the season. But it just like, yeah, they absolutely should consider trades. I'm wondering if the level of these prospects and also the quality as a whole has gone down from what I hear. Keith Law put in his article at the beginning, like the decimation of the minor leagues. They took away levels a few years back. They took away teams.
Hmm.
They're
Yep.
they're discussing doing that even further, which I think would be foolish. But anything for some extra money for the owners, I guess. Um, but anyway, like he said like the top half was not that hard, but like the bottom half was a lot harder for him to come up with than in other years because just the quality as a whole in the minor leagues has gone down. And so I don't know if that speaks to how many guys the Mariners have on this list, or the Cubs, or even the White Sox, who have six on there and were the
Hmm.
worst team in baseball history last year. I don't know if it means the same thing it did 3 years ago, 4 years ago.
If you want my 2 cents on it, yeah, they should trade for stars. They should trade for some bats. They should trade because, at the end of the day, if you just sit on your hands and give up because there's a better team in the NL, then you've already let them win.
Salient points. Yeah, I think, to be seen who will come out of the AL mess. That is going to be, mostly mediocre, if not a little worse than that. But we'll see who comes out of that. Could be the Mariners. Could even be, someone like, could just be the Astros again. Could be the Yankees again. You never know. But I
Could be the
think,
Angels. Well, probably not, but it could
well,
be.
I think we know who it couldn't be, and I think the Angels are one of those teams that I think we know it couldn't be. But I think that'll wrap up this week's episode. A great one, always a good time to get to hear your guys' thoughts on the NFL and the MLB. Look, if you're listening, if you're watching, thank you so much for listening and watching. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're getting socials up and running. We should be on some of those fairly soon. So once we have handles and stuff to share, we will share those. And look, if you're our friends listening to this, shout out to you because you hear us talk a lot all the time anyway, and we text you anyway. So appreciate you listening. But yeah, and tell people about it, bring people in. We talk a lot about a lot of different stuff, but we keep it pretty casual, feel like we can entertain anybody out here. So yeah, tell people about it, share us up, and once we get socials up and running, we'll share those with you guys as well. But other
got
than
a lot
that,
of got a lot of fun stuff planned.
yeah,
But we're always also, if you have a football or baseball topic or even like a pop culture topic, why not? Let us know and we can throw it on the notes and discuss it to the best of our abilities.
Yes, sir.
yeah, drop those comments, engage with us. We'd love to engage back. So other than that, that is all for this week. Shout out to Pete Carroll. Shout out to future Raider Russell Wilson and Bobby Wagner. Shout out to everybody listening. Shout out to everybody watching. Appreciate you all. Tune in again next week for another great episode. See you then.
Bye.